Good afternoon. Welcome to the IR interview series. I am Dr. Jon Åberg. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Global Political Studies at Malmö University, Sweden. In this interview series, we interview IR scholars about their preferred theoretical perspectives. The idea is to get a brief account of why scholars have come to appreciate a certain IR theory through a short interview. Today, I have the honor to interview Professor Barry Buzan, a preeminent English school scholar. Welcome, Professor Buzan.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to my study in Belsize Park.
Okay, thank you. Please, before we start with the more specific questions about the English school and English school concepts, could you please tell me a little bit about your scholarly background?
How I got to where I am? Yes, well, I had a boyish interest in war, partly fueled by the fact that I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, so the Second World War was still very current. So that kind of got me into the idea of the international, and that boyish interest grew into a general interest in history and conflict. I had the good fortune while I was in secondary school, this was in Canada, to be exiled to the library for misbehavior, thrown out of the social studies class. And this was great because I had the whole library and a lot of time to read. And to my great good fortune, I found H.G. Wells' Outline of History. And I read that at an impressionable age, and it made a very big impact on me. So that probably set up quite a lot of the kind of thinking that I've done. And then at the University of British Columbia, I was fortunate enough, I had no idea what I wanted to study, really. I knew I had some interest in history, but history by itself seemed a bit dry somehow. But I had the great good fortune to encounter Cal Holsty, who happened to be teaching there, teaching international relations, just at the point where he'd completed his textbook. This was 1967. So I got his kind of perfect version of it, and it made an enormous impact on me. And that's what tipped me into the study of international relations, because, I mean, I can still remember his lecture on polarity theory and being blown away by how you could simplify something so complicated in that way.
Yeah. And now you are at the very moment in London.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me a little bit about what you're doing now, your position now at the moment.
Well, I'm long retired, so I'm mainly writing. I've got several books on the go, as usual. So I'm continuing to write about East Asia, China, Japan, that sort of thing. I'm continuing the work with Amitav Acharya on international relations as a discipline and where it should be going, the kind of global international relations stuff. And I'm, for the first time in a while, I'm doing a book by myself, trying to pull together everything I've done over the last quarter century in terms of world history and English school thinking, to write a global history from an English school perspective, which has not been done before.
Interesting. So there's a lot on your table, so to speak.
Yes, I like it that way.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay, so let's get more specific. So you are a well-known and prolific English school scholar. If we are going to ask something about the English school and its insights so the students can become enlightened in terms of the concept and the theory of the English school, what are some of the English school insights when it comes to IR research in general?
Okay, I'd offer 3 points that have been particularly attractive to me. One is the idea that the English school studies not the international system, which is what most American theories do. Realism and liberalism are all interested in systems, which is a very mechanistic view of things. The English school studies it in a more sociological way. So it's interested in international society, world society, and how does this look as a society? Sociologists, for some reason, never pick this subject up. So it's a bit odd for people trained in history and political science to be doing this. because the sociologists don't seem to be able to get their heads around the idea that a society can be composed of anything other than people. They don't like the idea of a kind of second level society made of collectivities of people, i.e. a society of states. So that idea, to me, is a very attractive way of looking at things. Combine that with the second point, that the English school takes history seriously, which most of the other mainstream theories don't. I mean, liberalism has only been around a couple of centuries, so it can't look back very far. It basically looks at modern history over the last 2 centuries. Realism claims to speak for all of history, but does so in such an incredibly narrow way as to make history irrelevant, because it says nothing has changed. Right?
Yeah, it's timeless wisdom.
Yes, the English school takes history seriously, and I like that, because I take history seriously too. So history matters. That'd be the second point. The third one, which appeals to me a lot, because I'm the kind of person who likes to think from a high altitude, right? So my particular strength is a very high altitude of what's going on. So I'm a kind of by nature almost a structuralist. So I look for the big patterns in things. And what's appealing about the English school is that it's a way of looking at social structure and looking at social structure in a lot of detail. So realism only allows you to look at polarity, really, and the distribution of power, which tells you something, but not much. Constructivism, in its kind of Wendtian form, offers a little bit of a glimpse into social structure, but not much. I mean, he offers you 3 choices: Hobbesian, Lockean, and Kantian. With the English school, you can really look in a lot of detail at the structure of international society and how it evolves and changes over time. And I find that a very attractive and useful thing to do.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And if you are then to choose 2 or 3 core English school concepts, which ones would you choose and why? Perhaps you have already touched upon some of those, but if we try to specify it again, 2 or 3 core English school concepts, which ones would you choose and why?
Yeah, okay. Well, the one I've worked on most in my own English school work is the idea of primary institutions. Those things like sovereignty and nationalism and territoriality and international law, the market, those kinds of big organizing principles, if you like, that become the way in which the units, the norms of behavior are defined in international relations. So this is a different kind of institutional approach from the normal one of looking at what I call secondary institutions, i.e. intergovernmental organizations and that kind of thing. Those intergovernmental organizations count, but they're not the main form of institutions. And it's that institutional view that enables you to look in such detail at the social structure. So some kind of institutions have faded. Imperialism, for example, racism have become obsolete. New ones are on the, like environmentalism. So you can watch this slow dance, as it were, of the institutional structure as these ideas evolve and change and sometimes die away. So that's my really big interest, I think, in concepts. Second one would be Adam Watson's concept of raison de système, which he defines as the idea that it pays to make the system work. So it's a counterpoint to raison d'état, the reason of state. Okay, so reason of state, raison d'état, welcome to Donald Trump and America great again, or America first. Raison d'état, we need to make the system work, right? Because otherwise we're all in trouble if it doesn't. So I think having that concept to balance raison d'état and the more nationalist view of things is very valuable. The third idea is a bit more complicated, but basically it's a distinction between pluralism and solidarism in the English school. So a bit complicated ideas, but pluralism is basically the logic of coexistence, right? You assume that the players in the system are quite different, but that they have some need to coexist, even if their cultures don't agree about much. Solidarism is the logic of cooperation, of shared values, of joint projects. It assumes that the units are closer together and have more kinds of common purpose and more identity. And that, I think, is a very useful way, because both of those things are always in existence.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to my mind, is a very useful way of thinking about things. So those three concepts be my top picks for English school.
Okay, could I ask some follow-up questions?
Sure.
Yeah, when you state that racism is obsolete, how would we reconcile such a claim with the fact that we have a global movement in the Black Lives Matter, for instance, at the moment that is quite popular, or at least spreading throughout the world?
Okay, good question. I think this brings the need for history here. Racism, up until 1945, racism was perfectly legitimate, something you could talk about in Light Company. If your library serves it, I suggest your students go back and look at stuff that was written about international relations before 1945. Mm-hmm. And you will find that almost all of it is riddled with racist language and racist assumptions, because that was perfectly acceptable to do that. Race theory was one of the main ways of thinking about international relations at that time. So it was legitimate to do so. It was accepted practice. Mm-hmm. Now, racism still is practice, but it's generally not legitimate. Mm. There are still people who do it, and it still needs to be fought over and argued against and demonstrated against and such like. But it is only in a very few places is it explicitly legitimate.
Mm-hmm. So could we argue...
That's the change.
Okay, so could we then argue that as a primary institution, to use English school jargon, racism as a primary institution is no longer legitimate?
Yes, I mean, I would embed this in a slightly larger idea, because it seems to me the thing that changed after the Second World War was that before, going right back to the beginning of history, before 1945, the institution was human inequality, which was expressed in many ways, of which racism was only the most recent. But slavery, dynasticism, aristocratic class differentiations, patriarchy, all of those things were norms and acceptable norms. They were legitimate before 1945. So that whole package of things was, in a sense, overturned and replaced by the idea that humans are all equal. And that's now the game that we play. It doesn't perfectly describe our practice, but it describes what's legitimate.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification. I have another follow-up question, and that is in relation to solidarism, which you mentioned, and you mentioned pluralism and solidarism. And in your article from 2001, I think it is called The English School and Underexploited or Unexploited Resource. Yeah. You have this chart where the international system, international society and world society, they have borders where they all interact and where they overlap and meet. And the interaction there is between solidarism and world society, at least an evolutionary approach to world society. How would you say, or do you see an example of us going towards some kind of world society, at least an evolutionary trajectory towards some kind of world society?
No, I mean, the English school is not a teleological approach. It assumes that all of those things, international society, world society, and the kind of realist power political world are all always in play, both in discussions about international relations and in reality. I mean, I've moved on a bit from that position. That was 20 years ago, so I have a somewhat more refined view of these things now, but maybe that's more than you want to know at this point. So I don't see an evolution towards world society as such. I mean, I think that would be a rather difficult thing to do, but you can see the way different things are changing in different balances within the international system and international society very broadly. But that's a rather complicated picture. I'm not sure we have time for me to go into that in too much detail.
Yeah, but what we can bring with us here is that these three concepts, they coexist at the same time.
Yes.
And we can understand different facets of international relations by using these concepts.
Yes, I mean, I think at the moment you'd have to say the power political side is getting stronger. The international society side is getting weaker, and the world society side is in a very strange mixed position, in some ways getting stronger, but in other ways getting much more fragmented because of the impact of the internet and all of that. But yes, you assume these three things are in continuous motion and that the balance amongst them changes as conditions change.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. In terms of policy relevance, how would the English school inform policy?
Well, if you're really interested in policy relevant studies, the English school may not be your best choice, right? So Hedley, amongst others, is quite famous for kind of advising people not to go down that route, right?
Yeah.
So it is principally an analytical tradition.
Yeah.
I mean, realism, because it has such a narrow focus on power and a very simplistic theory of balance of power, it can prescribe what you should do, i.e. don't let anybody become hegemonic. So in that sense, realism is a good basis for, well, it's a clear basis. Whether it's good or not, we could discuss, but it's a clear basis for offering policy advice. The English school doesn't have that kind of basis, right? It's basically saying there's always some kind of complicated normative structure out there composed of some set of primary institutions. And this changes generally slowly over time. But the English school doesn't, I mean, some people within it will take a view in favor of particular institutions. So various English school writers have tried to promote human rights and say this is a coming institution. So you can do normative promotional stuff within it in that way. And the human rights thing would be the best example. But the theory overall does not say you should do this rather than that in any kind of specific policy relevant way. That would just depend on the normative dispositions of the individual analyst. What it does do, however, to go back to Adam Watson's idea of raison de système, the idea that it pays to make the system work. I think in terms of policy relevance, what it says very loudly is you can't just operate the system on the basis of raison d'etat. Otherwise, you're in a kind of madhouse where nobody is paying attention to anybody else's needs or interests or wants, than only looking out for themselves. And this is an inevitable recipe for chaos and conflict. So if you're a policymaker, you need to think not only of raison d'etat, because you have responsibility to your citizens and voters, but raison de système. You've got to try and find a way of making the system work, whatever that system looks like at the time you're in it.
And given what you just said, and also given the fact that you mentioned previously that the international system is increasing, or that we can see the power game or the international system game taking the center stage, and given the fact that you just mentioned that you cannot just consider raison d'etat, but also raison de système, how would you make sense then of Donald Trump and most, at least in Europe, most understandings about him as a spoiler, or as somebody that has renounced leadership, somebody that is not paying attention to international institutions, etc., etc.?
Yeah. God, you're asking me to make sense of Donald Trump?
No, sorry. Yeah.
That's a pretty big ask.
Sorry.
I mean, what can I say? Donald Trump seems to have absolutely zero interest in raison de système. So he's
Yeah,
been
exactly.
busy. America probably had the biggest stock of international social capital of any country, with the possible exception of Switzerland, um, uh, anywhere. And he's been busily burning through that absolutely as fast as he can go. And he's about halfway. Give him another 4 years and there will be none left. Right? So in that sense, he's very clear. Okay? He doesn't give a damn about the rest of the world. What he doesn't understand, it seems to me, and his supporters don't understand either, or if they do understand, they don't care, is that America's power is not just its material power, it's not just its big economy and its big military, although those are important. It's also its social standing, the fact that America was trusted and had a lot of friends and allies. Compare with China, which really doesn't have many friends, and Russia is a kind of ally, but in a really rather tentative way, mainly based on the fact that they share a common dislike of the West. But take that away and there's not much left between them, whereas America had deeper friendships and deeper relations of trust with that. And that was the key to its superpower status. By itself, just as a forceful, a material power, America will be hugely diminished by Donald Trump. So the fact that his slogan is "Make America Great Again" is deeply ironic, because it's exactly the opposite of what he's doing.
Okay, interesting. So then other dimensions of power apart from the material dimensions are important, and
Absolutely.
the standing and prestige of United States is also.
Yes. From an English school perspective, you would define a great power as, or a superpower particularly so, as a country that is able to build and strengthen international societies.
Yeah, and also Hedley Bull, he emphasizes the existence of a club, right? And nuclear weapons. And he also has a third component, that is recognition, at least in his work, The Anarchical Society. So that tripartite conceptualization of a great power, including recognition as well, is perhaps what Trump is not caring about.
Yeah.
But okay, thank you very much for that elaboration. I have one last question before we leave, and that is, do you have any advice to our fellow IR students at Malmö University?
Yeah, I give two answers to that question. One is, you're a student now, and that's a very special and privileged position in many ways, and you should use it to identify what it is you're interested in and follow that. Right? Because most of the rest of your life, people will tell you what you have to do. Right? Your parents told you what you have to do, blah, 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 blah. Now you're in that nice space between being a child and being a full adult out in the world and looking after yourself. Now you can choose what you're interested in and pursue it. And it's the only chance you'll get. Now, it may seem stupid, but I can remember some of my fellow students when I was at university who took an interest in Islamic politics. Right? This is back in the early 1960s, and we all laughed at them, saying, you've consigned yourself to obscurity forever. Who the hell is ever going to be interested in Islamic politics? Right? But 10 years later, they were laughing back. Right?
Yeah.
So
with the revolution in Iran and so on.
Follow your interest and make the best of it, because then you can define an interesting life, and you won't get too many chances to do this. That'd be the general advice. The specific advice would be, don't get yourself too committed to any particular international relations theory, unless, of course, it's the English school, which is the kind of synoptic theory and allows you to take into account all the others. But you need to think of international relations theories like lenses, okay? So if you're in the natural sciences, you use different kinds of lenses to look at things. You use your eyes and you see color and shape and texture in the way that you're used to. But if you're looking through an infrared lens, you see something quite different, right? which you don't see through your eyes normally. Or if you're looking through X-ray, lens, again, you see something different. You see all the kind of dense bits, but not much of the color and shape and all of that. And IR theories are like that. You know, there's lots of them, and each of them, just like the lenses in the natural sciences do, each of them offers you a greater insight in a narrow way, right? But the price you pay for that is it obscures other things and makes you blind to them. Right? So it's only by looking at, in a sense, all of the theories that are on offer, do you begin to get the full picture of what you're looking at. Right? So a lot of realists and a lot of economists, I think, have become so wedded to their particular theories that they think that those theories explain everything. They've blinded themselves to all of the things that they can't see. So keep an open mind about theories and see what each one offers and how you can combine them in different ways.
Thank you for that advice. Very useful and very insightful to have a chat with you. And thank you very much for participating in this interview series, Professor Buzan.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, all the very best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.